everyone. So today our topic is about the inflation and recessions, especially discussed with Malaysia's key economic challenges in 2025. So these are our members. In Thomas, we have Kritika, Vishal, Yuseng, and Iqbal. So today we'll go through the introductions, the overview of the key issues facing in Malaysia, the current policies and also the effectiveness, and also even some of our recommendations towards the challenges, and also some assumptions and limitations with the conclusions in the end. So I'll briefly introduce you to these two concepts, like inflations and the recessions. So basically, inflation is the sustained increase in the prices of the goods and services, which will reduce the consumers' buying power, while recession refers to the economic slowdowns, which will lead to the declining of GDP growth and weaken the investment of business, and also causing the rising of unemployment rate. So why they are relevant? It's because that if there is an inflation increase, it will lead to the heightened money policy by the governments and leads to the risk of recession. So these trade-offs will make Malaysia face the risk of inflation and recession today. So as you can see here, our graph shows that the volatility of the US dollar exchange rate towards the ringgit Malaysia. So from 2023, you can see the ringgit is essentially weakened to nearly 4 ringgit 80 cents per US dollar. Higher import costs. So while the ringgit depreciates, it will add the importing costs and will contribute into inflation in the end. But recently, in 2024 to 2025, some of the recovery is from 8 ringgit 50 cents to 8 ringgit almost 20 cents per US dollar. So this volatility will highlight Malaysia's vulnerability towards the external shocks, especially the changes in US interest rates and global trade conditions. In short, currency weakness is the key driver of the inflation risk, and it ties closely to the broader concern of recession if the cost rise or the growth is slow. Now I pass to my colleagues.
Let's take a look at Malaysia's inflation trends for 2025. So the first one will be CPI inflation. So the Malaysia's inflation rate has been calm for 2025, which is around 1.8%, better than last year. And the difference is mainly due to government. Mainly the reason is because the government has been maintaining subsidies in key essential parts like food and fuel. But when you look at the inflation rate excluding food and fuel, it is like 2%. So this shows that even though the prices are stable, certain sectors has the cost pressure like services and manufacturing. Moving forward to food and beverages, the food inflation remains moderate around 2 to 3%, mainly due to government implying policies such as price control and anti-profiteering measures. Basically, they are stopping the sellers from hiking up the price too much. But however, imported food items like rice and dairy still has the impact, which means fluctuations in exchange rate can have an impact in Malaysia. Next is transportation and fuel. Transportation costs have been declined thanks to government introducing fuel subsidies, which means global prices and also the stable domestic fuel prices has helped a lot in transportation-related inflation. Even the transportation fares have been very stable in Malaysia in 2025. Next is GDP growth and unemployment trends. First is economic growth. So in Q1, as you can see in the graph, in Q1, Malaysia's economic growth has been 4.4, which shows that it's growing. Even though it's lower than Q4 in 2024, it's showing that our GDP growth is increasing. Next is a steady moderate growth, which is not too fast, not too slow, but a stable condition. Next is unemployment rate, and as you can see from the graph, the unemployment rate has really come down very much from 2021 to 2025, and this shows that the job creation has improved and signaling that sustained post-pandemic recovery. This is highly due to government policies, and even though the unemployment rate has lowered, the rates are still very slow. Shows that limits household spendings and overall consumption growth. Next is youth unemployment. Even though the overall unemployment rate in Malaysia is lower, the youth unemployment is quite high for the ages of 15 to 24, which remained around 10.2 in Q2 2025, nearly the triple rate, national average rate. This gap is mainly due to skill problems where fresh graduates don't have the skill that the employers are requiring nowadays, especially in technical sectors and STEM. And this is unaddressed, persistent youth joblessness could hamper long-term productivity and can also affect the overall economical growth of Malaysia. That's all for me.
Thank you, Rika. So I will say, and I will talk about the current policies and its effectiveness implemented by Malaysian government to address inflation and recession. So I will cover the monetary policy, fiscal policy, and the effectiveness. Okay, under the monetary policies, the first one is about the overnight policy rate OPR adjustments. So Bank Negara Malaysia has reduced the OPR by 0.25% from 3% to 2.75% since 9 July 2025. The purpose is to balance between supporting growth and controlling inflation, and the outcome will help anchor inflation expectation and avoid overheating with talking of recovery. The second point is about the foreign exchange stabilization. So Bank Negara Malaysia intervened to stabilize the ringgit when needed using foreign reserves and direct market operations. The purpose of this is to prevent imported inflation and reduce volatility. The next I will talk about the fiscal policy. So for the government can do subsidy for provide the fuel, RON95 and diesel, and electricity tariff and essential food items such as chicken, rice, and cooking oil. Okay. The next one, the government can provide cash assistance. The direct cash transfer to provide it to the low and middle income household. For example, the Bantuan Sara Hidup and Sumbangan Tunai Ramah and so on. And it is designed to cushion the impact of rising living costs due to subsidy reform and inflation. Okay, now I will talk about the effectiveness implemented by the Malaysian government to address inflation and recession. So the first one is the inflation control. Now the headline inflation has remained moderate between 1.4% to 1.9% in 2025 according to the Bank Negara Malaysia website. And the second one is fiscal burden remain. So the fiscal deficit target is around 3.8% of GDP in 2025, and it is still above the pre-pandemic norms. And lastly is about to maintaining the monetary policy discipline. Bank Negara Malaysia keeping rate steady avoids unnecessary shocking of growth when inflation is moderate. It also gives flexibility if inflation starts rising. So that's all for my part. I will pass to Krishan to talk about the short-term policy.
Good morning, sir. So beginning with the short-term policy recommendation, these are the immediate actions to stabilize the economy and protect vulnerable groups. So first, enhancing targeted subsidy is crucial. Direct financial aid should focus on the B40 and low-income household, using digital platforms to ensure efficiency and minimizing its leakage. So second is strengthening anti-profiting enforcement will help curb the unfair price increases by middlemen. Stricter monitoring and penalties will ensure consumer protection and maintain market stability. Next slide. So the next slide will be talking about the medium-term policy recommendation. So the first focus is to protect local food and energy securities through incentive and domestic agriculture and renewable energy, reducing dependency on imports. So on the second one, wage policy adjustments are needed. Minimum wages would align with productivity growth and SMEs. So should be supported through tax incentives and to manage wages transition effectively. Together, these strategies foster wages growth and long-term self-sufficiency. So finally, the long-term policy recommendation focuses on the future-proofing of Malaysia's economy. First, diversifying exports by shifting from commodities to high-value and value-added industries, while supporting SMEs and improving trade logistics. Second, invest in digital and green economy, expanding 5G, AI, fintech, and renewable energy, and training workers in new digital and green skills to stay competitive in the market. Lastly, learn from peers such as Indonesia's fuel subsidy reform, which improve fiscal efficiency, and Singapore's fiscal buffers, which strengthen crisis management. These long-term strategies will position Malaysia for sustainable and inclusive growth. That's all from my part. I'll pass to the next person.
All right, so I'll be talking about the assumptions that we make whenever we discuss this topic. So I'll be talking about the steady global recovery, effective BNM policy, and political stability. So first off, steady global recovery. Malaysia's trade-driven economy assumes that external demand will remain stable with inflation looking manageable. What this means is that whenever we're talking about Malaysia's external partners, which is US, Indonesia, any of the ASEAN countries, China also, so we have to assume that they will stay stable throughout this whole endeavor. Effective BNM policy. BNM will be expected to balance inflation control and growth support. So this assumption is made as in BNM will always have effective policies to control the inflation and in order to grow support. And political stability, we talk about smooth governance and consistent policy direction supports investor confidence. So what this means is that whatever political, any law passed, it will always go towards the investor confidence, and it always will be making investors want to invest within Malaysia and into Malaysia. Next, please. Limitations. So now let's talk about what limits us. Global uncertainty. Vulnerable to external economic shocks, oil prices, US interest rates, those are just examples. So what does global uncertainty mean? Well, with like Malaysia, like I said previously, we have to assume everything is stable. This is what happens if you assume nothing is stable. So if US markets were to crash, we will be affected. If China markets were to go down, we will be affected. Basically anything global that happens, Malaysia will be vulnerable. Fiscal deficit. High government debts limit space for large stimulus. So what is this talking about? This is basically saying that because our government has lots of debts that they have not paid back yet, this limits us in what we're able to do. And one of those things is giving stimulus away. Like for example, in the midst of COVID-19, we were given large stimulus checks within the whole of Malaysia. So because of that, debts come up. And because of those debts, nowadays, I don't think the government can no longer give space for large stimuluses. And finally, subsidy reliances. Prolonged subsidies will drain budget and more integral reforms. Like we talked about previously, we will have to focus more on targeted subsidies. So what that means, as we discussed, instead of blanket subsidies where all Malaysians are covered, Malaysians only in B40 and M40 communities will receive fuel. This helps to reduce costs and to also give back to who needs it more. And finally, we will be going into the conclusion. So, what is the biggest challenge in all of this? Balancing the pressure of inflation with the risk of recession. Because the government has to know when to step in, when to intervene, basically. So if we just let the blanket subsidy stay in the whole time, that's a challenge because that will increase costs to the government, which will eventually lead to inflation. And inflation means stores will raise their prices, and that'll be bad for everyone because cost of living goes up. Opportunity cost, short-term relief, subsidy and cash aid, versus long-term relief, structural reforms, digitalization, adjustment of fiscal policies. So what this is talking about is basically, if we go for short-term relief, we give subsidies today, in 2, 3, 5 years' time, we might not be able to do structural reforms because we've already used all that money in the beginning. But if we want to go for long-term, today we don't get those cash aids, we don't get those subsidies. RON 95, B40s and M40s will no longer have those subsidies for them. Our recommendation, support domestic demand and productivity. What that means is support local. As long as we grow businesses within Malaysia, our economy will increase, we will have more GDP, and we will have more global market control. Through diversification, resilience against global shocks can be developed. So what does this mean? Through diversification, we don't put all our eggs in one basket. We put our investments into other countries, into different stocks, per se. And because we have our investments in all different places, we will gain resilience because one country goes down doesn't mean another country will feel that shock, which means we have developed resilience against global shocks. And finally, we will talk about the enhanced social safety nets without relying on fiscal improvements. So this is our recommendation as well. If we were to make more social safety nets without having the reliance on fiscal improvements, we could make the cost go way down. We could make the government debts not rise as high, and it will be good for the society. Yeah, that's it for me. So this is our references, and there you go. Any questions?